The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk, the Bronx's flagship television talk show. We'll take your phone calls tonight, so please join the dialogue at 718-960-7241. You can also email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Well, tonight's guest recently received a letter from the state Democratic Party asking that Senator Pedro Espada Jr. be ousted from the party. We're going to ask him about that. We're also going to talk about community board appointments, the state budget, politics, and other topical issues. Please join me in welcoming back to Bronx Talk one of our most frequent guests over all the years, Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be back.
I did a count. I believe this is your 13th visit on our show in our 15-plus years.
That's it?
That's for the I know, it seems like many, many more. So anyway, let's talk about this letter. You received this letter from the State Democratic Party asking that that you, as I guess you are the chair of the county committee, do I get that right?
Yes, that's right.
So you would have the jurisdiction to recommend that he be ousted from the party. Are they out of line of simply writing a letter and trying to ask that you do this?
Anybody could ask. Are they out of line? The letter is actually from an individual who lives in the Bronx who I think he's the deputy executive director of the state committee. Are they out of line? There are a lot of issues that have been raised about Senator Espada over many years. The question is, what, if anything, should we do about it at this time? Under the election law, a complaint like this can be made to the chair of the county committee of the particular county and a particular political organization, as opposed to the county leader. And I have the option of convening a trial, of not convening a trial on this issue. But it's a very serious issue. It's going to take a lot of examination. I've done some research, read the election law, read some of the cases, spoke to some experts on this. I don't feel any pressure to do anything right now. And in fact, in some ways, I feel a little bit of pressure not to do anything in the middle of a campaign, because we are in the middle of a campaign. Candidates have filed their designating petitions. I think 4 Democrats have filed petitions, including Senator Espada, to run in the 33rd Senate District Democratic primary. And the primary is on September 14th, which is in less than 2 months at this point. And my inclination is to let the voters of the district make a decision. This can always be acted upon later if we decide to, or not. But right now we're in the middle of the campaign.
You could have a pretty interesting, you called it a trial, somehow that word seems a little strong to me, maybe a hearing or something like that.
Right.
That would be a pretty serious thing to have a hearing at this point before the campaign. So I guess on that account, I would agree and say, gee, you'd have a pretty good circus in the middle of a campaign trying to run something if you were serious about doing it fair-minded.
Well, I mean, and some people have suggested that by doing this trial or hearing, that it might play into Senator Espada's hands. I mean, certainly one can turn this situation around to say, look, they're picking on me. Why don't you let the voters make a decision as to what should be done? I mean, there are several specific issues which are raised in the letter, and I'd be happy to talk about them, and they are serious issues.
It certainly doesn't seem, just to pick out one of the issues, it certainly seems obvious that he does have a home in outside of the borough of the Bronx. Many people believe that he just got an apartment so that he could run for office. Is that something that's quote unquote impeachable in this case, or there are so many of your colleagues that have that? So how could you, frankly, pick on one?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt. There's no doubt that he has a home in Mamaroneck, and he doesn't deny it. The question is, does he live there most of the time or not? That issue was adjudicated 2 years ago in a petition matter, an election law matter. Senator Espada was kept on the ballot, but most people seem to believe, certainly media reports would indicate that that's where he lives. But you're right. The question is, if Senator Espada is brought up on charges, so to speak, in an attempt to disenroll him from the party, might there be other elected officials who are similarly situated, who do not live in the district that they're supposed to represent, but simply have a voting address there? And I would say that the answer is probably yes. There probably are other people who are like that. So do we pick on one person and not on others? That's certainly a legitimate question. And there are other questions raised here, too, which can be raised about other elected officials, I would say.
He says, and Senator Diaz agrees with him, and others as well, that say it's because he's Latino. This is a hit on his ethnicity and that he's selected and there are other elected officials. Do you believe that?
No. That's ridiculous. While there are clearly cases when certain actions are taken based on ethnicity in an inappropriate way, simply raising that issue is kind of like in my opinion, a smokescreen. It's not the real issue here, and I've never heard any ethnic issues brought up with reference to this matter. Whatever people think of Senator Espada, pro or con, I think that raising these issues has nothing to do with ethnicity.
Did this come from Andrew Cuomo? Many people say, well, you know what, he just wants to simply justify his own investigations against the senator, puts him in an interesting political spot. Maybe somehow he can simply justify his going after Senator Espada and make some political points over it.
Some people have speculated that the Attorney General is behind this. I have no reason to believe that. I certainly have no knowledge that that's the case. I have a letter here signed by Mr. Santana complaining about Senator Espada. This is not the first time this has happened. 8 years ago, in a similar situation, the Bronx Democratic Party did hold a hearing with respect to disenrolling Senator Espada. That was when he publicly announced in the state capitol that he was a Republican. And so some people thought that gave good grounds to kick him out of the Democratic Party. And there was...
Sounds logical to some degree.
Well, okay. They went through this process, and in fact, after the hearing, it was determined that he should be disenrolled from the party, but then it leads to a series of court cases. First in Supreme Court, where Senator Espada lost, went up to the Appellate Division, reversed, Court of Appeals, where it was reversed, and the Court of Appeals, if I correctly remember exactly what happened, it was they didn't throw him out of the party so much as they said that the party can do this, but they have to narrow the scope of evidence that they were considering to not include things that happened on the Senate floor, for example. And it was sent back down to Supreme Court. And I think ultimately Senator Espada prevailed, but it was not on the merits. Rather, it was on a technical issue. So I suppose you can say that the issue wasn't totally resolved back then. But back then, he publicly said he was a Republican. I don't know that he said that this time around.
If you're a staunch Democrat, just looking at the structure of the New York State Senate, if you're a staunch Democrat, the last thing you need right now is to have one less Democrat, because you could literally tilt all the decisions in the state of New York in the other direction. Seems if it came from Andrew Cuomo or any top Democrat, seems a curious thing to attempt.
Well, you know what? For the past year, the Senate has been... some people would use the word dysfunctional. I don't know if I want to use that word, but it's been very difficult to get legislation passed ever since June 8th of last year, the day of the coup, when Senator Espada and Senator Montserrat, no longer a senator because of his problems, they switched over to the Republican Party. They made an arrangement with them, a coalition, whereupon Senator Espada was named president of the Senate. A lot of legislation died on June 8th of last year. It was never resurrected. A lot of my bills that passed the Assembly that I was hopeful would pass the Senate, nothing happened because there was, for a month or two, nothing took place in the Senate. And then the Democrats took back Espada and, in fact, made a majority leader. Probably not a great idea. Given the politics of what was going on.
You mentioned Hiram Montserrat, and you have talked about if you're going to defeat somebody, the way to do it is at the ballot box. Didn't happen to Hiram Montserrat, did that?
No, Hiram Montserrat was ousted from the Senate by the Senate based upon his conviction of I guess it was a misdemeanor offense and I guess the Senate found it particularly disturbing, the particular type of offense they found particularly disturbing. But ultimately, the voters did decide, because then there was a special election. Assemblyman Peralta, my former colleague, ran in that election, and so did Senator Montserrat, and he got clobbered.
Let's move to the politics of that particular race. I guess if you say you're not going to have a hearing, then it would give you some freedom to endorse?
Well, I didn't exactly say I won't have a hearing. What I said was that my inclination is likely to put it off till after the primary.
Without asking you to endorse a candidate, there are, as you stated, 4 candidates, 3 challengers, and the incumbent, Dan Paternak, Fernando Tirado, and Gustavo Rivera. Is it possible for an incumbent to be defeated with 3 challengers? I mean, is that a good situation? And let me ask you this: would you work to eliminate 1 or 2 of the others, or advise some not to run?
It is hard to defeat an incumbent in a split field. If I were advising candidates, I would suggest candidates really consider what their goals are. Maybe their first goal is to get elected, but if their first goal is to make a change in who the state senator is, they may want to consider whether or not their continued candidacy makes sense or not. Some candidates may not make the ballot. I would think that, from my belief, is that while it may sound, you may say, well, the more candidates running, the better. It's good for democracy. It's good for the community. You can look at it differently and say, if you want a clean election and give the voters a clear choice, you can make a strong argument that the best scenario would be a one-on-one race. You have the incumbent, Senator Espada. Some people like him, some people don't. People have very strong opinions of him one way or another. And then one other candidate. So I think a very strong argument can be made in that direction as well.
I guess your colleagues, many of them, the Working Family Party and others have already supported, Councilman Capel have already supported Gustavo Rivera. You're not willing to make an endorsement. Will you make an endorsement at some point?
I might, but this letter and the possibility of me being called upon to, in essence, adjudicate Senator Espada's continued enrollment in the party makes me hesitate to make an endorsement, because if I make an endorsement, it could then be said, well, how could I run a fair hearing? And whatever we do with Senator Espada, we have to be fair. It has to be due process. We can't be in a position where anybody can be accused of being unfair. So will I make an endorsement? Well, I don't want to sound evasive, but
stay tuned.
Maybe yes, maybe no. It's very difficult to do that, I think, at this point.
I was really hoping we were going to get it on Bronx Talk, but okay. Let's go to the phone. A couple of our regular political folks want to talk to you. No surprise that he would call tonight. Bob from Riverdale also writes for the Bronx News. I gave you a free plug there. Hello, Bob. How are you?
Good evening, Gary. Good evening, Assemblyman Dinowitz.
Good evening, Bob.
Perhaps some of the other candidates who are running want to get their name out now in case there is, Senator Espada somehow wins the election and then is taken off the ballot, being declared a non-candidate or even indicted. So if there's a special election, their name is out there already, and they've had a chance. But
so wait, you're saying if they take themselves off there, why would their name be out there?
No, Gary. I'm saying they want to get their names out there now in case something happens if Espada's elected and then taken out of office.
It seems like that's pretty far thinking. But
District, you yourself, Assemblyman Dinowitz, said at the June endorsement meeting of the Ben Franklin Club, your political club, that it is unwise to endorse because there are 5 candidates, including the incumbent, and there may be more candidates or even some dropping out.
Okay, so ask your question, Bob. What's your question?
One candidate dropped out. Petitions have been filed. Challenges have been
Bob,
made.
Just ask the question.
What makes it better 1 month later to endorse when you still have 4 candidates, and it's still possible that one or more of these candidates could be knocked off since the Board of Elections won't be finished
So you're
until the
confirming basically what the Assemblyman said, that he was not willing to endorse at this time.
Is he willing to say that to his club, though?
Are you okay? So thank you for the question. So the question is, would the Ben Franklin Democratic Club also withhold an endorsement pending waiting to see what happens with some of these other candidates? And would you recommend that they do that?
No, I would not recommend that. The club met on May 25th, I believe, for our endorsement. We had over 120 club members there voting on the various positions. The one office we didn't vote on was this particular one, and at that time I recommended that we hold off because there were so many candidates, and most people did not know a lot about any of the candidates except for Senator Espada. And I had suggested that on July 15th, that's the last day to file petitions. On July 15th, it's also the date to file financial disclosures. So we would know both how much money candidates raised and how many signatures they got, so it would give us a clearer picture of which candidates are for real, as opposed to which candidates
Well, we're
are
getting
just...
closer to that. We're not quite there yet.
Well, I think we're much closer because we know one candidate already dropped out, so we're down to 4. One candidate only filed, I think, 1,150 petitions, so there's a distinct possibility that he might not be on the ballot. And we also know how much money each candidate raised, so that can give us an indication as to whether any of those candidates are going to be in a position to run, are viable. So tomorrow night, Tuesday, is the club meeting. My own opinion is that the club should make an endorsement. I'm not sure I'm going to suggest who the club should endorse, but I don't know that the club should sit on the sidelines. But it's up to the club membership, and it's up to the candidates to convince the club members. Let's
talk about something else, and I've frankly been anxious to ask you about it, the community board appointments recently. It seems so obvious that Tony Casino, who ran against Oliver Capel, runs an alternative political club in Riverdale, was not reappointed as political payback for all the political things that he did. Is this appropriate for that to happen?
Well, first, I'm not willing to concede that he runs another political club because I haven't seen any evidence that there is a political club. But putting that aside...
Well, in name then, but okay, we don't even have to go
Well,
there.
you know, I would suggest the following. In the last election, Tony Casino campaigned, and one of the main issues he campaigned on was term limits. Mm-hmm. Well, he served on the board, I think, for 5 terms. So perhaps he believes in term limits when it affects somebody else, but not him. I don't know. I haven't discussed it with him. But board appointments are for 2-year terms. They're discretionary. They're made by the borough president and the council members. No one is given a lifetime appointment. It's not the United States Supreme Court. And many people aren't reappointed, especially when new elected officials come in. They may want to have their own imprint on the board and bring in some of the people that they know.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying so that because it comes from the borough president.
I'm not putting blame on any, I don't want to use the word blame. I'm not trying to put this off on anybody else. What I'm saying is that many people are appointed to the board. Many people aren't reappointed. That's just natural. Does politics ever enter into it? Well, why? I can't imagine that politics does not ever not enter into it. Of course, there's politics that's involved, but no one on the board is special, and then no one on the board deserves a lifetime appointment, especially somebody who believes in term limits. Mm-hmm. Tony Casino was appointed to the board, just like he was appointed by the mayor to the Van Cortlandt Conservancy, and he was appointed by the mayor to the Charter Commission. So he's been very fortunate to have been appointed to a number of positions. Some might argue that serving on the Charter Commission, which I think they were talking about, the future role of community boards is one of the things they would look at. Serving on the Charter Commission and serving on the community board might actually be a conflict of interest. I don't know, but in this case, we're not going to have to find out. He served on the board, and I will say publicly that I think he did a number of good things on the board. Some have claimed that he politicized the board in a way that many people felt uncomfortable about. So there are pluses and minuses. But he served for 5 terms. That's a lot of terms.
Does this discourage people from running, saying, I want to run for office, but if I do, gee whiz, some of the other things that I do in this community might be up for grabs? Well, in other words, if I do something that challenges the established political order, yourself and certainly
am I established?
I think you talked about 5 terms. You've been there for a little while. But
I don't believe in term limits. I never said I did.
So anyway, what do you make of that notion that maybe this would be discouraging people from participating?
Well, judging by the number of people who apply for the community board, judging by the number of people who like to run for office, it doesn't seem like people are discouraged. I would feel very confident in saying that had Tony been elected to the council, he probably would have tried to make significant changes on the board himself. I mean, he did get appointed to the board through political connections, and so be it. That's the way it goes.
Let's
you can't cry over it.
We have so many issues, and time is always so fleeting on this show. Let's go to the telephone. Mark from Pelham Parkway joins us. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hi, Gary, Assemblyman. I've been out of the country for a while, so I have one question I got to ask. Did we finally reach a budget?
We did.
We did. And
it's one of the things that I have. Let's ask a specific question about it, because we don't have a lot of time.
Because I left right at the end.
Well, we sort of reached a budget.
Oh, sort of. Oh, so that's not a conclusive idea.
Well, the Assembly finished passing the budget bills. The Senate passed all but one of the revenue bills. So, and that's being held up because a couple of senators have things that they want done, and they're holding it up. In the Senate, you need unanimity of the Democrats.
Do we actually have a budget?
Okay.
No, we don't actually have a budget.
Oh, we don't. Okay, so we have.
I can tell because I'm not getting paid right
Mark,
now.
Mark, please ask the question.
Well,
There's so many things to cover.
But here's something I keep amazed that I'm totally amazed at. Jeff was just talking about Espada, who we know does not live in his district. They got him moving into his
Mark,
condo.
ask the question. Come on.
So the question I have here is, when you look at somebody like Congressman Engel, who is claiming his house in Maryland as his primary residence and has a closet he lives in, that is illegal. When you do not live in your district, that is illegal. And all the finagling that we do with these politicians who don't live in the district, that is illegal. You're supposed to live in your... Don't you think it's about time? You were part of the coalition that promised change in the Bronx. Don't you think it's about time we do have some change in the Bronx? Because it just seems like it's the same old song.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, let me respond to that. First of all, with respect to Congressman Engel, I have to correct what he said. Congressman Engel lives in a 3-bedroom apartment, not a little closet, and I've been to his apartment numerous times. I was just over there yesterday, in fact. So it's not fair to say that he doesn't live in his district. When you're a congressman, you have to live in 2 places, unless you happen to be the representative of Virginia. But if you can't commute to work every day because you live close by, you have to have a home in your district, and you have to have a home in the Washington area. And that's what Congressman Engel has. Whether people like what his home looks like in the Washington area, that's a whole other story. But he has a very real home right here in the Bronx, in Riverdale, in fact.
Do you think that it's time to either change the rules or really make, I guess I'm taking the essence of what Mark was suggesting, make it clearer that, or somehow limit the notion that somebody can live elsewhere? It's a little different, I think, for a national candidate, a national elected official, because, I mean, you can't expect somebody from Montana not to have a home in Washington.
Of course they have to have a home. And they can't commute every week back and forth.
Do you think it's time to change those rules?
Well, I think the rules are the rules. They're very clear. You have to be a member of Congress in New York, you have to have a residence somewhere in the state. A congressman doesn't actually have to live in his or her own district. They can live anywhere in the state. In fact, years ago, I remember none of our congressmen, Bingham lived in Congressman Weiss's district, and Congressman Biaggi lived in Bingham's district, and so on, because, lines change over the years. But Congressman Engel, I know, and I've been to both places. He has a home in the Bronx, and he has a residence as well in the suburbs of Washington.
Going back to the budget, has the governor been right all along? The governor has lambasted the legislature, saying, you know what, you're irresponsible because you just don't have the guts to make the tough choices, and so it's one of the things certainly that's protracted this budget negotiations. How can you pay for everything? Isn't Governor Patterson the only reasonable voice out of the whole state legislature?
Well, I guess the governor is talking slightly differently now that he's not seeking votes. He's not totally wrong, but he's certainly not totally right. He and the Senate Democrats, and I say the Senate Democrats, I mean one Democrat, especially in Buffalo, is holding up the budget because of one particular issue, and that relates to tuition at the state university. That should not hold up the budget. In fact, the New York Times had an editorial on that today. The governor is also holding up the budget on the issue of FMAP, on the issue of how much Medicaid funding we're going to get in New York, and he claims we have to budget for the contingency that we don't get the money. The problem is, if you budget based on that contingency, then the feds will say, oh, I guess you don't need the money, so we're not giving it to you. But those issues should not hold up the budget. He has made a decision, for whatever his reasons, to hold up the budget, because the truth is, the longer the budget is not resolved, the longer he's politically relevant, I guess is the word. And I'm not saying that in an insulting way, but once the budget is resolved, then he kind of moves into the background a little bit.
A couple of other, there's just so much out there. Just so maybe a quick answer, if you would. Do you like the amendment to the to the stop and frisk database? The idea that this database should no longer be kept.
I voted for the bill, and the reason is not because I want to see crime go up, as as Commissioner Kelly might say. I believe that we have to use every tool available to fight crime, but if many thousands of people are stopped and frisked and let go because there's nothing wrong, they should not be kept in a database. If they did nothing wrong, then based on that, the logical extension is to take everybody's DNA, all of us, and put that in a database. That'll fight crime.
Just curious, another political question, because you're so close with Senator Eric Schneiderman. Were you surprised that Borough President Diaz came out so early for a different candidate?
No, Borough President Diaz is close friends and former colleagues with Assemblyman Brodsky. Assemblyman Brodsky is a good candidate. He'd be an excellent attorney general. And I guess it didn't surprise me because I knew he was going to do it.
Oh, okay. Surprised me because it was a Bronx elected official who was running for office.
Well, but there are relationships, and they know each other, and they've worked together, and they respect each other.
Speaking of Mr. Schneiderman, did you buy the explanation that he didn't realize the car he was riding in had hit another car?
I'll tell you.
To me, I have to tell you, it seemed far-fetched.
Well, I'll tell you a little story, a very short story.
It's got to be very short.
About 2 years ago, I come out of the Y in the morning, where I go to the gym every morning,
and
there was a dent on the side of my car, and I said, damn, somebody left after they hit me, and then I came to the conclusion they may not have known it. I saw that little scrape on the car that that his driver hit, and $3,000? The words insurance fraud came to my mind. $3,000?
Assemblyman, thank you so much. My long list of items has been narrowed down somewhat. We hope you'll come back so I can finish the list the next time.
I always have something to say.
Apparently you do. Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of the show are available at blip.tv. Just search for Bronx Talk. Now, make a note, if you like to talk politics, we'll be presenting a debate between the candidates in the race for the 76th Assembly District on August 9th. That means incumbent Peter Rivera and challenger Luis Sepulveda will be with us on August 9th. Make a note of that. We'll be inviting other candidates to debate as the political season goes on. We're pretty close on another one, too. We'll let you know about that. We usually announce upcoming shows on the Bronx News Network blog, so that's where you can get information in the middle of the week before anybody else. In any case, we'll be here for Bronx Talk next Monday night and every Monday night at 9 on BronxNet's Cablevision Channel 67, Verizon Fios Channel 33. Special thanks to producer Jane Folloro and the cast of Thousands upstairs. And to you, good night.